Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
The Wild Hunt, Urban Style, Finale by Bear Lair 64. When I arrived at the station marker on the street above, I dug out my phone. Crap, it was smashed. The porkinator had weighed, a ton? I looked around but saw no signs of a clock. It had to be getting late, early, whatever though. I picked up a direction and started to pedal. I started to make my way towards home. I was pretty sure that the hunt would be waiting for me somewhere along the way. Maybe they'd gone ahead. I was still a little shaken and my legs hurt terribly. It was hard to pedal, but probably best to keep the blood circulating. If the hunt caught me, it'd be flowing. I was in the middle part of downtown, where the buildings rose to an incredible height and left the street level in perpetual shadows, except for the street lamps that came on after dusk. More light at night than during full daylight. I stayed on the roadway. There was too many huddled lumps sleeping on the sidewalk and in doorways or grates. Likely homeless people or addicts. But after what happened with the last shapeless lump of a person, I wasn't going to risk it. I was still coming down from the adrenaline high, and my mind wandered a little as I considered the beauty and wealth on display in this part of town. The sheer effort that had gone into raising these structures spoke to the pinnacles of human ingenuity, yet the broken beings who lay around the bottom of each glass tower spoke to how far our species could plummet. Contrasts and symmetry. My thoughts scattered as I noted a tent shelter over a grate that emanated steam. 4 figures emerged from the tent that would have barely held one of them. One sported a pair of bullish-looking horns. Another stalked on 4 limbs. The front 2 longer than they should be, like a giraffe or gorilla. Only its head was a nightmare of short spikes and too many eyes. There were 2 others in the dark, all sharp and pointy-looking. I tore forward and they trampled along towards me, emitting a lesser sound of hooves and hard feet than did the entire hunt. I geared up as quickly as possible, but I already knew this race was lost. There were no more bullets, silver or otherwise. The slavering mini-horde started to reach forth claws, and one of them, with a raven's beak, screeched eagerly. The chill was pressing me towards another shudder. If that happened, it was definitely over. My bones couldn't rattle and ride at the same time. Then another, first-time event in my life. I was happy to see the police. A cruiser was stopped at the end of the block, hopefully an occupied cruiser. I cut in close and slapped the hood of the car as I turned right onto Avenue F. F for Fubar, I thought in my panic. The small pack of hunters scrambled to make the turn with me while they avoided the car. I got a glance of number 4, a large hound man thing with a bony white face and long red ears. I was nearly at the end of my ability to go any faster, and they began to regain the few steps they'd lost in turn. I guess that hooves and hard feet tended to slide on smooth pavement, but quickly recovered. Then the siren whooped and wailed, and the red and blue lights flashed with uncanny brightness. Ultra-bright headlights pierced the shadows, and the Bopo were on the way to the rescue. Never thought I'd see the day that I needed somebody, especially them. It worked. The 4-pack of beast people split and veered in 4 different directions, all away from the police car, and more importantly, away from me. I stopped and panted, raising my hands. Dang, why hadn't I ditched Sony's little pocket rocket? Then again, maybe a gel cell would be the safest place. I quickly shed that notion as I recalled the confined space on the train car. I could only imagine what would happen in a cramped jail cell or interview room in total darkness, with no weapons. The officer approached, shined an all-too-bright flashlight in my eyes, and told me I could put down my hands. "So what was that all about? A cute Halloween prank?" he asked and raised his eyebrows. His tone was more inquisitive than angry. Maybe I'd get a chance to lie my arse, tell him a good story. In the hood, he'd have had a WTF moment, followed by handcuffing me for safety. Only then would he have spoken, and none too gently. Downtown officers definitely had a different approach. "Sir, did you see those people chasing me? I just needed your attention. I was scared." I used those innocent eyes and the tone of a young, good citizen type in fear for his safety. The last was easy. I was still miserably afraid and shaking. He smiled. "I'll be honest with you, young man. I was typing a report and didn't see anything until you got my attention. I saw some shadows for a minute, maybe people running. Why do you think they'd be chasing you?" I looked around haplessly for a moment and stuttered out that I didn't know. I used the goofy manner of speaking of my peers in suburbia, ending each sentence with an upward inflection and a stammering. Then I clenched the lost puppy routine with a dumb, general inquiry. "Can I, call my mom?" "In a minute, kid. Look, what are you doing downtown after 3 a.m? Are you on something?" I tried to look offended. "No, sir. I don't use illegal drugs. They mess up my prescription ones. I was at a Halloween party with friends, and I, fell asleep. I have to get up early and take a test. So I'm, trying to get home. We live in Wexford condos." I knew it was a gamble, but I had no idea what the hunt was doing, while the officer assisted what he assumed was a wealthy, good citizen. Wexford was high-end and convenient to downtown. He was taking his time, hoping to avoid a complaint by someone who might have influence. He was also taking my time. We needed to wrap it up so I could go. "Look, maybe you should call your mom. Downtown can be dangerous at night. The street people aren't evil or anything, but some of them have mental disorders or are addicts, or both for that matter. They don't like intruders." He held up a hand to forestall the objection he assumed I would have at being called an intruder. "Not calling you anything, sir. I just meant from their perspective. They often consider the area to be their home and can be, territorial." I nodded stupidly. I think I'd like to close enough to get home, okay? I think your lights and sirens probably scared everyone." I trailed off like the rocket surgeon I wanted him to assume I was. He thought for a moment, decided to take the bait, and then nodded in a relieved way. "Okay, sir. Be careful and keep your eyes open. Be safe." He made his escape to his patrol car while I stuttered out appreciation. Another first. He called me sir. Twice. I made a mental note to spend more time in downtown. As I pedaled up on Avenue Fubar, I deliberately rode a little awkwardly, like a dumbass, helpless college kid who couldn't wait to get home to mommy. I turned left, the direction I needed to go. The cop, if still watching, would assume I needed to go over a few blocks and ride home along 6th Street. I rounded the corner and looked to my left at the mirrored plate glass of one of the gargantuan buildings. I wondered briefly whether the 4 hunters would coalesce again and get me. I shivered, and by this point I couldn't tell whether it was the approach of the hunt or just fear, fatigue, and November chill. Then I saw my reflection as I rolled quickly ahead. In the reflection there were shadowy figures behind me. I automatically dug into the pedals and geared up as quickly as I could. I tore ahead at full speed and into the narrow trail of light left by the streetlights. Were they dimming around me? Probably. I was definitely foobarred this time. I was already nearing the last of the monumental glass towers, and would now be traveling towards the lesser structures, where less prosperous enterprises were conducted. I could hear the distant rumble and the baying of hounds, and I knew that the final chase had begun. The path of light had not been a way of salvation for me, but a means to drive me to where the hunters wanted me to be. The shadows and inconvenient obstacles were like beaters that frightened the prey and led it to the killing grounds. I rode and rode. I didn't look around. I just kept going all out. The hunt should have closed on me, but they hadn't. As I crossed another large four-way intersection, I dug out and tossed the last of my nails over my shoulder. I was cold, and I could hear them behind me, but all I could do was ride. I eventually had to start dodging crap in the street. There were piles of uncollected trash on corners, and dumpsters were left in plain view at the heads of alleyways. I narrowly missed the carcass of a dead rat in the middle of the road. I was back in the hood. I don't know why I had the momentary thrill. Perhaps I was simply happy that I'd die on familiar ground. The best laid plans of mice and men often get foobarred, at least in the hood. This was truly a night of firsts for me. I was thrilled when I saw a certain luxury car prowl towards the next intersection. There was no mistaking the owner, as it was painted a hideous shade of purple, with some big cat spots painted in bands along the bottom of each side as trim. I could hear the purple implied something stupid about royal colors. No idea what type of royalty Jaguar could be. Sultan of crap stains? Maybe one of those priest guys who ripped out people's hearts at the tops of pyramids down south of the border. For now, I saw a chance to crap the focus of the hunt. I let out a loud whistle and yelled, "Hey, Jaguar! F you, beach!" Then I turned to follow the car. I only hoped that he wouldn't have the stereo up too loud to hear me. Something got his attention, though, and he came to an abrupt halt. I almost smashed into the rear bumper. I fended off the driver's side of the car with my right foot. The move produced a satisfying thump and scrape, and left a smudge and slight dent in the driver's side of the door. That would set him on my tail. Unfortunately, I could no more outrun Jaguar in his Jaguar than I could the hunt. However, they moved. But when I recognized the hood, I recognized where in the hood we were. Right smack in the heart of Jaguar's block. Right in line with my nefarious plan. I just wished I'd planned a more specific endgame. I knew where I wanted to go, but not exactly what to do when we arrived. I cut through the narrow alleyway and saw him come to a halt at the head of it, and well behind me. The rumble and roar of the hunt faded a little, and I dodged through a few more narrow ways, heedless of lights or shadows. Obviously, word had gotten around as I had hoped. Jaguar and his crew were likely looking all over for me, and had been since my visit with Sony, the Prince of Arstards. Unlike Sony and some of the other stellar leaders of the various trashy gangs, Jaguar liked to drive himself, though he kept a bodyguard with him, one of Big Ray's cousins, Aso Diablo, Demon Bear. Everyone called him OD. He wasn't quite as big as Big Ray, but he was considerably smarter, and therefore more dangerous. Plus, he was alive, and Big Ray... I had to grin, just for a second. I hoped that a similar end awaited the lonesome leecher. He was known for doping and raping girls, so his name was not just initials, but his sole mode of seduction, OD. He must have figured out where I was headed because he wasn't too far behind when I used my bike as a step stool and scrambled over the sheet metal junkyard at La Selva. It was Jaguar's lair, and an earthly horror, a fitting jungle in which to end the hunt. Jaguar and his toadies had a taste for torture and blood sports. It was an arena where he hosted dogs and cockfights, where he used animals to tear apart some of the humans he wished to torture. He disguised it as boxing and wrestling arena, and had rings and matches for those. The events took place in an aircraft hangar-sized barn inside the junkyard walls. It was decorated with murals, statues of Mesoamerican gods, and gaudy crap from Mexico, and points south to give the image of a wild jungle run. The junkyard was real. The chop shop provided some extra income, yet the real money was on forcing animals, two-legged or four, to tear one another apart, and on side gigs selling drugs and sex to the attendees. Jaguar wasn't just any old turd. He was a truly evil piece of reeking crap. I heard his car pull up to the gate and saw his headlights penetrate the numerous gaps and gouges in the metal fencing. I was headed to the dog pens inside the barn. I was desperate to release some hunting hounds of my own. Anything to fend off the hunt for just a little longer. I passed through a line of cages that were set high off the ground and was greeted by an indignant squawks of his prize-fighted roosters. As I rounded a corner inside the large barn-like area building, I felt something snag my hoodie and tear at my claws. My heart nearly stopped. It had to be some ghoulish creature from the hunt, and it had finally caught me. After the initial tug, though, the claw, I assumed, had seized me, tore loose from the garment, and as it glinted and tinkled against others like it, I saw that it was set for fighting spurs for the birds that hung from a support beam at the end of the row of cages. I snatched up 2 pairs of the razor-sharp metal spikes and placed a set of blades between and around the middle fingers of each of my hands. I had no other weapons. I might as well play Wolverine. Silly as it was at a time like that, I grinned and thought, cool, at least I can go out fighting like a superhero. The kennels were on the other side of the arena. I could hear either Jaguar and OD or members of the hunt rattling around inside the arena building. Probably both. It didn't matter. Both parties wanted my blood and to revel in my painful death. I ran, hobbled directly across the fighting pit. It was just a section of sand surrounded by a low timber wall, high enough for scumbag spectators to lean on and watch as living beings tore one another to bloody shreds. I was tired and sore and needed to get where I was going while I could still function. I passed the halfway point across the pit when shots rang out from behind me. Sand and wood splinters from the arena floor and the wall ahead spalled back towards me. I leapt, planted my hands on the wall, and managed to clear it at a run. I felt a tug and a searing hot pain along the top of my right shoulder as the gunfire continued to hammer my eardrums. Foob! Frick! He shot me! I ducked and ran bent forward into the kennels. I had hoped he would stop shooting since he wouldn't want to hurt his prized fighting dogs. He did. He valued them far more than the life of a punk teen who was no more than a crooked delivery boy. The gunshot that hit me was only a graze, but it stung and it hurt and bled like crazy. Felt like it grazed the top of my shoulder bone and left a trail of fire. As I passed the cages, the dogs leapt up and snapped in fury at my intrusion and at the smell of fresh gore. There were no barks, just low, throaty, rumbling growls of hostility. I pulled up the latches to each cage, and near the end of the row, I unlatched and tore open the door to the last cage. I pulled it open and used it as a barricade. If they couldn't readily get to me, I hoped that they would go after Jaguar and OD. The canines would have held no love for either man, as they'd each teased and tortured the animals to train them to aggression. As many times as my hopes had been dashed, I expected to have my fingers that clutched the wire of the cage gnawed off to the knuckle. However, my wolverine claws saved me from that. I felt a momentary pang of sympathy when one of the dogs bit a spur and let out a yelp as he tore open the inside of his mouth. Despite the threat, I felt bad for the dog. He hadn't asked for this. Dang, I'm getting soft, I thought briefly. That's when Jaguar called out from the front of the row of cages. This pen is for fighting dogs, not coyote bitches. You stay in here and my pit fighters will tell you into little coyote fajitas. It's Dia de los Muertos, you know. Day of the frickin' dead, bitch. You're about to join them, but slow-like. He paused, and both hulking morons peered into the shadows that had at last worked to my advantage. The dogs had settled and went strangely quiet. It was odd that they hadn't turned on one another, but the other side of their primal nature was at work. Dogs favored working as a pack. They turned as one towards their erstwhile masters. A few of them whimpering and whined for a moment, and they shuffled and jockeyed for position. The more aggressive towards the front, Jaguar pushed past OD and yelled at the nascent pack. Get the frick out of my way, worthless frickers. I was going to feed him to you, but now I'll tear him up myself. Coyote, I'm going to wrap you in burning tires, and we'll take bets on how long you can scream before you die. Then I'll feed you to the dumbass dogs. With that, he lashed out his foot to kick the first alpha in range. But the monster pit bull mix dodged and clamped its teeth around Jaguar's shin bones and proceeded to tug and shake his head in fury. Jaguar hit the ground, grunting and cursing, and the pack swarmed onto him, each taking out his anger on the thing that had caused them so much pain and misery. OD stepped forward and raised his pistol. He started shooting randomly into the pack of fighting dogs and was rewarded with a few yelps, and some of the animals fled and blended into the, oh crap, rapidly chilling shadows. The bolder beasts turned on him after his pistol was empty, and he decided to make a tactical retreat. Too late to save himself, but he reasoned out what to do. Way to use your brain, Dr. Carson. Or, OD. As in odious dumbass. The dog pack tore out after him, and the entire ripping, snarling, screaming in terror mass went over the arena wall and into the fighting pit. Then the sounds became truly unpleasant. I pushed the cage door away from me and rose to flee, in turn, in a different direction. I made it to the front of the kennels and started around the walls of the arena to take the long way back to the rooster pens. When the sounds arose, the now familiar chill spread from deep within the recesses of my body, and I had to stop while my bones shuddered and rebelled against the icy grip of soul-deep dread. It was over. The hunt had arrived. I heard the grisly pounding, snapping, and clashing, baying, snarling, howling, and chittering laugh of pure devilish delight as the shadows filled the fighting pit. I knew that the hooves and hard feet would splatter with OD's blood. They would have to visit a clinic. That dude definitely had diseases. My mind insanely chattered, as it always seemed to do, under stress. I clenched my fists into balls and raised them along with my feeble claws. No doubt the Lord of the Hunt would pause to laugh. The shadows coalesced into individual figures, each more hideous and lethal in nature than the last. The hounds bayed and snarled, and the enormous antler crown rose above all the others. The voice, 1,000 voices, and one rumbled like thunder. So near to the dawning sun that would succor and save your little mortal. You have given us a merry chase, and you have even managed to bring down one of our finest hunters. The hern chose well for the Samhain hunt. With the loss of a hunter, there is an opening among the hunters. I stood there gaping like a fool and trembling in near panic. My eyes bulged with incomprehension. I worked my jaw, but no sound emitted. I couldn't because no rational thoughts could form that needed to be given voice. The many-horned lord rumbled in frustration at my mortal inadequacy. You fought bravely and fled cleverly. You have successfully hidden. If you choose, you may join us in place of he whom you slew. You will be permitted to add aspects of a nature creature to your own. Perhaps those of your super coyote. You will only then be mortal. You will then be mortal, only while on the hunt and facing true prey. Otherwise, you will live and remain eternally strong and youthful. Consider it carefully. This is a great honor we offer. Mortals always seem to crave eternal life. What is your answer? Wow, these guys had lots touch with mortals. Eternal life, but as a thing? A monster who would want that? Then it dawned on me. Scumbags like Sony and Jaguar would. Others of similar bent would jump at the chance to live forever, all the while causing misery to others. It would take a staggering hubris. I started to answer, trying to determine a way to decline the honor and still manage to avoid being eaten. The leader of the hunt hadn't mentioned alternatives to acceptance. As I opened my mouth to doom myself, a new sound arose. The crowing of a lone rooster. He let out its hoarse, screeching call once more, and then others joined with their own raucous calls to announce that the dawn had arrived. The antlers shifted as the great head cocked in the direction of the noise. Dawn, he announced. The hunt has ended. You have survived, mortal. You will not be hunted again. Your life is once more your own. Yet the offer still stands, and you have not given an answer. As he rumbled out his pronouncement, the shadows lifted, and the hunting horde resolved into a colorful array of beings in many forms. They all appeared less sinister, and most revealed themselves as strikingly beautiful. The antlers of the Lord spread gleaming, golden with their own internal light. He appeared as a golden-skinned man, with flowing hair and beard that shone in the light of the setting moon. When I observed their true forms, the enticement to join them became a temptation. Terrible and beautiful all at once. I revised my earlier thoughts. Trash like Sony and Jaguar would have the hubris to want to be an immortal. But these beings would never have accepted them. The Lord of the Hunt was truly honoring me. This was the prize for surviving the long night, for being offered as a sacrifice by the Hern. I was glad I'd done some research. The great Lord of the Hunt and all wild things. I am honored beyond measure. Yet I must decline. The mortal world and form still has appeal for me. I wish you success in the future hunts, but I must, with greatest respect, decline. At this I bowed my head and focused on a lump in the dirt in front of me, a piece of food from the vendors who had piled the crowds at La Selva that had fallen in the dirt and been stepped on until it was a mushy, dirt-covered mass. I stayed that way for a while, as the cocks crowed and my heart soared with the sounds. When I finally raised my countenance towards the towering figure, he was gone. They were all gone, and the silence was stunning. Only the rusty calls of the former fighting birds remained. I continued my journey to the rooster pens. On my way, I passed the crib where more atrocities regularly occurred. There was a row of closet-sized rooms along one wall of the hangar-sized barn. It was where the girls who worked the customers provided sexual services. Sonny's dancers at some point decided to become dancers, and most of them eventually became prostitutes, mostly by choice. Jaguar's girls were brought to this city, used as sex slaves, traded among other sex slavers, and if they were lucky, eventually farmed out to do different work or become the wives of other illegal workers. I hadn't really thought about them much. I'd shielded my conscience by staying clear of each gangster's business. I wasn't sure how to open those cages. I knew there was a house nearby from which Jaguar's turds and turdettes shuttled the party girls. I would have to think about how to fix that one. Jaguar was dead, but someone would eventually take his place and all of this wretchedness would continue. Sunk in those morbid thoughts, I reached the rooster cages. I opened them as I had the dog cages. The dogs had apparently made a hasty retreat when the hunt arrived. I was concerned that the birds would take to fighting, so I opened each cage and let the occupant flee before opening the next. A few of the roosters would not leave the cages. I didn't dare reach inside, just left the doors open. I decided that I'd call animal welfare or maybe a rescue outfit to come take the lot. I didn't normally think of calling authorities or anyone for that matter, but I didn't know any other way to help them. The animals had saved my life. I owed them. As for the girls, maybe there was some hotline to call. Somebody had to care what happened to them. I made my way to the gates and around the wall to where my bike still faithfully leaned. I passed Jaguar along the way and was too tired to kick it anymore, though a fresh wave of hatred for him rose my hackles and restored a modicum of energy. Besides, with a decent paint job, it would be a top-notch ride. I thought about it for a moment, but I knew that the paperwork to make the thing legal just wouldn't be worth it. I knew offense, but despite the profit it would bring, it just wasn't worth the risk and hassle. Instead, I collected my bike and climbed aboard. But the gouge on the top of my shoulder screamed when I put weight on it as I gripped the handlebars. I'd have to stop and dig out my first aid kit. I finished the patch, all the while contemplating the fact that the Hern had put me forward as the true prey, and I considered what, if anything, I should do about it. I was sure he had reasons. Maybe they'd discovered the theft from Mrs. Hern's jewelry box. Or maybe it was just some family relation he had to the hunt. The problem required thought of which I was not currently able, so I climbed aboard my bike and slowly, With creaking joints and aching, exhausted body, I pedaled towards home. As I left the property of La Selva, I noticed the pink and orange rays of true dawn emerging from the perpetual haze of the city. I heard the sound of traffic and people stirring. Real people. The hood rats and gang turds were either holed up in their dens or on their way to do so. I thought maybe it was time to do something else. Live somewhere else. Be something else. To consider other paths like my parents had. It was time to go back home to what they tried to teach me, as much as it was time to get back to the little house where the Hearns dwelled, on the borderland of the hood. I was alive and free to make my own choices. Time to move on. So quoth this raven. Something tells me that Mr. Hearn is probably quite surprised and proud of our little hood rat coyote. I should like to think so. Well, my darlings, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Many thanks to Michael Bear's Lair for letting me read these. I certainly enjoy it. You know how I love the Fae and the Wild Hunt. Thank you all for coming to my little chateau to listen. It means so much to me. It really does. And special thanks to my Patreon supporters, Ermin, Darren and Jennifer, Laura, Mutant Artificial Intelligence, and Tabby Cat.